referred to a group of scientists in Sweden who have spoken about planetary boundaries, aspects of our environment that the human population needs to manage in order to live safely for many years into the future. They can be summarised as climate change, the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, biodiversity loss, level of waste nitrogen compounds, level of phosphate compounds in fresh water in the sea, having enough fresh water, having enough land to grow food, the level of dust, volcanic ash and other aerosols in the atmosphere, other chemical pollutants such as microplastics and heavy metals, and stratospheric ozone depletion. These boundaries are some of what are called biophysical boundaries. They are among other biophysical factors that affect the well-being of human, animal and plant life on Earth. While it is important to look at safe boundaries that apply to the whole planet, it's also very useful to see how these boundaries apply to local situations. These boundaries can apply to countries or smaller regions such as islands or towns. At times, these boundaries are more obvious once they are exceeded. It becomes clear that it has had a big impact, either on people or living things. People are now familiar with the fact that higher CO2 and methane levels are resulting in global warming, and that global warming is producing a change in climate. This change in climate is seen to be contributing to sea level rises, more frequent cyclones, more droughts, warmer oceans, and more bushfires in different parts of the world. In these areas, the safety boundary has been exceeded. The amount of fresh water that can circulate through the water cycle is finite. It is needed to grow and process all our food, so there is a restriction on how much we can use in order to stay safely within our limits. From time to time, some towns in Australia struggle to stay within that limit. For example, the freshwater boundary has been exceeded in Australia in the Murray-Darling Basin. The basin extends across 4 states on the eastern part of the country. Farmers along the Darling River want more water from the river for their crops, while scientists who are concerned about the environment want more water for the native birds, fish and plants living in the rivers and lakes. The government of El Salvador was mindful of 2 boundaries, the need for fresh water and the need to avoid pollution that comes from mining, when it banned the mining of all metals in the entire country. Landowners on the tropical island of Bougainville forced a copper and gold mine to close. Here, the boundary that was exceeded was pollution from the mining of the metal copper. While the safety boundary of climate change and CO2 levels for the whole planet may not have been crossed, those who have had homes burnt down during bushfires, Australian farmers who have lost all their animals in drought, those Pacific Islanders who are now climate change refugees, victims of cyclones in the Philippines, as well as farmers in Bangladesh who have had to move because of rising sea levels, may feel that the climate change boundary has been crossed at their local level. The Swedish scientists, along with scientists working for the United Nations, point to a very serious loss of biodiversity. The red parts of this map show where there has been more than a 40% loss of biodiversity compared with undisturbed ecosystems. Studies of nearly 100,000 different species across the entire globe show that there is a high percentage at risk of extinction. Plants and animals have become extinct throughout the entire history of the Earth as environments have changed. What is concerning scientists now is the rate of extinction. That is now estimated at between 100 to 1,000 times greater than at the rate in the past. The Australian platypus is now regarded as a threatened species in New South Wales. It is found in fewer and fewer places in our rivers. The Australian koala is not extinct. However, It is considered to be vulnerable to extinction in some parts as more and more of its habitat is logged, converted to farmland or burnt out by bushfires. This is the black-throated finch, a small bird that is now extinct in New South Wales and is threatened with extinction in Queensland as its breeding ground makes way for coal mines. A similar story applies to many other Australian animals: the far eastern curlew, the corroboree frog, the Gouldian finch, the western swamp tortoise, and the black-footed rock wallaby, to name just a few. In countries outside Australia, the story is very similar. The Siberian tiger, the brown spider monkey, the cross river gorilla, the Amur leopard, the Javian rhino, the saola, the Sumatran elephant, the vaquita, the hawksbury turtle, and the pangolin are some of the large species threatened with extinction. Why are so many animals and plants under the threat of extinction? The destruction of the ecosystems in which they live is one of the most important reasons. For example, in recent years, New South Wales farmers have been allowed to clear tens of thousands of hectares of bush on their properties, affecting at least 237 different species of animals and plants, including the koala. On the island of Borneo, the destruction of rainforests for the production of palm oil has resulted in the orangutan being classed as critically endangered. Many other rare and endangered species are found in the rainforest systems of Borneo. Land clearing is a threat to them all. In the world's oceans, the percentage of fish stocks that have been overfished has increased from 10% in 1975 to 33% in 2015. By that same year, 60% were fished at maximum level. These changes have occurred even though there have been an increase in fish and prawn farming. Why is a safe level of biodiversity considered important? Biodiversity provides what are called ecosystem services, such as pollination of plants, providing oxygen through photosynthesis, recycling waste, and providing medical resources. A safe biodiversity boundary can also apply to a particular organism, for example bees. Bees are important for pollination but are under threat from the worldwide use of insecticides. There is also a safe boundary in our world for nitrates and phosphates that should not be exceeded. Eutrophication and low oxygen levels that result from waste nitrogen and phosphorus can have a devastating impact on fish and other organisms in streams and in coastal regions. Having enough land on which we can grow sufficient food to feed everyone in the world is a global boundary as well as a local boundary. Having sufficient food is sometimes called food security. Reducing waste during the different stages through which food goes would extend this boundary and mean that less land would be needed for food production. What people choose to eat also affects how much land is needed for growing food. For example, 2 football fields feed 1 person per year on a standard American diet, while 14 could be fed from the same area of land on a plant-based diet. The demand for meat has resulted in large areas of rainforest in a country such as Brazil being cleared to grow grain. Much of this is used to feed livestock in feedlots. Again, this brings us closer to our biodiversity boundary. Some countries are beyond their safe water and land boundaries and must import most of their food. The safe boundaries for fresh water and land are not clear boundaries. For example, droughts can occur in food-producing countries, resulting in higher prices. This can cause food shortages or even starvation in countries that can't afford to buy food. In the following year, there might be enough rain. The idea that land and water boundaries have been exceeded can even be viewed at a more local level. A family living in a house with a backyard would not have enough land to produce its own food. Like some countries, it needs the money to buy food. Scientists are also asking, is there a limit to how much plastic we can have and still have a safe environment, particularly how much we can have in the sea? Plastic in the ocean varies in size. The size of the piece of plastic affects animals of different sizes. Two of the very smallest forms of plastic are microplastics and nanoplastics. Nanoplastics are present in most of our clothing. One study has calculated that hundreds of thousands of these very small fibres can pass out of a normal washing machine in a typical 6-kilogram wash. It is clear that larger portions of plastic are harmful to larger animals such as fish, birds and mammals. Microscopic sized pieces of plastic can be taken up by zooplankton and perhaps begin a journey through a food chain. At this time, research has not been able to establish just how harmful micro or nanofibres are to humans. More research has to be done. However, it is known that some types of plastic take hundreds of years to break down, so the amount of plastic in the ocean continues to grow as a form of waste. Just where the safe planetary boundary is for plastic isn't clear. Making sure that oceans don't become too acidic is viewed as another safety boundary. Carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels dissolves in the ocean and forms a very weak acid called carbonic acid. If CO2 emissions remain at their present rate, the average acidity of the surface of the ocean is expected to increase by 100 to 150% on 1850 levels by the end of this century. This would change the average pH of the oceans from 8.2 to 7.8. Acid reacts with calcium carbonate. It is believed that this increase will weaken the coral reefs surrounding many low-lying Pacific islands. As a result, the ocean waves would break over the islands more easily. It's also believed that it will weaken the shells of mollusks such as oysters and the shells of other sea creatures that need calcium carbonate.
So, going beyond these safe boundaries at a local or global level risks making where we and our fellow living creatures thrive far less suitable for life. As the great acceleration graphs keep rising, more and more regions throughout our world come closer to tipping points, points at which new and permanent changes occur. When we look at climate change, for example, an increase of around 2 degrees Celsius in average global temperatures above pre-industrial levels is proposed as one that could trigger a number of turning points. Just how far away such triggers might be is not always possible to determine. In the case of climate change, perhaps by the end of this century for some, or earlier for others. So these are some of the biophysical limits to economic growth, some of the boundaries in which scientists believe we should live in order to be safe. The next two lessons look at features we can expect of the steady state economy and the progress we are making towards it.